Morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We have made it to Friday. We're excited about that. Hope you're all getting ready for a really fun weekend. We'll look forward to doing a lot to kind of get you ready for that. We'll also talk about the things happening around Georgia here today. Another commitment got added. We are on that. Also, a little bit of a programming note. Jeff Sentell on Friday, as per usual. But Jeff is traveling. There's an event this weekend at IMG Academy. So Jeff's on his way down there, which means we miss him live on the show today. But we did record this yesterday. We also recorded it just prior to Landon Roldan, the wide receiver from North Oconee, committing to UGA. So no Roldan talk with Jeff, but some thoughts from me on that subject. Also, to begin things here today, I have this. A lot of attention this week about the EA Sports college football game ratings that have come out. We talked about the home field advantage stuff the other day. Some of their offensive and defensive ratings have come out too. I believe they've made a mistake in these ratings. Of course, many people do. That's what ratings are all about. It generates debate and discussion. But the mistake that I think they've made, I think is a pretty important thing to understand, to have an idea of what happens during a college football season and what will happen possibly in this upcoming college football season. So I'm going to try to make my case for you on that, and we'll see if we can get to something kind of interesting on that here today. We are glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I want to begin by making a small point, and that small point is going to kind of roll into a larger point here over the course of the next couple of minutes. We love off-season college football content. People put out lists and ratings and things like that, and listen, as a college football fan, I'm a consumer of that kind of content. I'm always enjoying that, and as someone who kind of produces this show, we obviously use the kind of ongoing discussion about college football as a springboard for our own talk, and we've done that now for a good number of years. I just think that's kind of fun. This is an entertainment product. I find that to be entertaining. Seems like a lot of you do there as well, which I'm very, very grateful for. So one of the things that we get a lot this time of year are the kind of like mathematical ratings. And, you know, some of the stuff that comes out is just like one man's opinion, and some of the stuff that comes out is sort of supposedly backed up by math. And I'm not against people who like the kind of so-called fancy stats, the analytics, that's a word you sometimes use. But as I get a little deeper into college football, here's one of the things I've discovered, is that the stuff that makes certain statistical formulas more complicated, I'm not always quite so sure it's particularly additive in terms of, hey, what makes it more difficult to understand? I'm not quite so sure that extra stuff necessarily makes it all that much more predictive. For instance, let me give you an idea of what I'm talking about here, is that if you really want to have an idea of how good a team was in a previous season, how good it possibly could be in the upcoming season, I think that some of the stuff that you can learn by what's essentially just basic arithmetic, if you look at the right stats in particular, I think that can be just as informative as some of the other more elaborate analytical stuff, even though the things that I'm talking about aren't quite so formulaic. Let me kind of lay this out even more so. You know, when I start looking at what was in a previous season, what could be in an upcoming season, there's sort of like four things that I've sort of drilled down on that I think kind of matter more than anything else, and I love them because they are really, really easy to understand. There are a lot more complicated and perhaps more sophisticated models out there, but the thing that I always seem to pay attention to is your offensive yards per play, your offensive points scored per game, your defensive yards per play allowed, and your defensive points allowed. Very, very simple, essentially just arithmetic. On a per-play basis, how many yards are you gaining? Defensively, how many yards are you preventing? Offensively, how many points are you scoring per game? Defensively, how many points are you allowing per game? And if you can look at a team that's pretty high up in those four categories, how many points they're scoring, how many points they're allowing, how many yards they're gaining per play, not per game, how many yards they're preventing or they're yielding on a per play basis defensively, that gives you a really clear picture of exactly how good a team might be. Let me drill down this a little bit more. If you go back and look at Georgia in 2021, top 10 in the country, yards per play allowed, yards per play offensively, points scored per game, points allowed. They're top 10 in all four of those categories, winner of the national championship. Same story was true for Georgia in 2022. Once again, that's a national championship type team. Last year, though, while Georgia was a top 10 team in scoring defense, a top 10 team in scoring offense, a top 10 team in yards per play offensively, Georgia did not quite crack the top 10 in yards per play allowed defensively. They were only 11. That seems like a small difference. But when we looked at Georgia with our own eyes for this past season, doesn't it sort of make sense that this wasn't quite the same level of defense? Perhaps we didn't always have the words to describe it or the stat to verify it, but something about our own eyes was saying, yeah, this Georgia defense here in 2023, not quite what we saw in 2021 or not quite what we saw in 2022. And perhaps coincidentally, perhaps not, Georgia also falls just short of winning the national championship because I would say it wasn't in the top 10 in all four of those categories. And it's worth pointing out that being a top 10 team, yards per play offense, yards per play allowed defense, points scored per game offense, points allowed per game defense, being in the top 10 in all four of those categories is really, really hard to do. In fact, last year, only one team did it. Notre Dame, believe it or not, shout out to the Fighting Irish, maybe not who you'd have expected, but they were in the top 10 in all four of those categories. So are you with me on this here thus far? And I mean this non-rhetorically. Are you with me on this? That I think one of the most interesting things to understand about a team and its stat profile is essentially just basic counting. How many points you're scoring, how many points you're giving up, how many yards you're gaining on a per-play basis, how many yards you're giving up on a per-play basis. And if you see a team that's excellent in all four of those categories, you are probably talking about a national championship contender. Now, that is the small point to build to a larger point. As I mentioned a moment ago, one of the interesting things we do this time of year is we pay attention to who releases their ratings or their rankings or their opinions or their whatever else. And that just sort of creates an ongoing college football conversation that we're very glad to be a part of. And this year we kind of have a new entrant into all of this because later on in July, something I think that most of you are very excited about, the release for the first time in quite some time of the EA Sports college football video game. And as a precursor and forerunner to the game's eventual release in a few weeks, they're kind of dropping some of the ratings that they're using in the game right now to generate conversation, but also generate attention for the product. You may have read some of this at DawgNation.com. And one of the things we've seen from EA Sports the last couple of days is their top 25 offenses and defenses as going to be housed within this game. And I want to focus on the top 10 on both sides of this here just for a moment. In fact, if you're watching on video, I'll show this on the screen. First of all, shout out to Georgia for being number one on the offensive side of the ball. Ironically, it's Ohio State, number one on the defensive side of the ball. Now, can I call timeout for a second and sort of pull out of the regular topic and say, let's go back a few years ago and say, hey, eventually the the EA Sports video game is going to come out, and we're going to see Georgia ranked as top offense because that's the thing they used to be sort of dinged for. We're going to see Ohio State ranked as the top defense. That's what it used to sort of be dinged for. Just kind of amazing how the narrative has sort of changed around these two national championship contending programs, Georgia on the offensive side, Ohio State on the defensive side. Just thought that was kind of an interesting thing to point out. But to get back to our main discussion, when you look at the top 10 offenses, you see EA Sports put Georgia at number 1, Oregon at number 2, Alabama at number 3, Texas at number 4, Ohio State at number 5, LSU at number 6, Miami at number 7. That's Colorado at number 8. Shout out to Shedeur Sanders, I guess. Missouri at number 9, Clemson at 10. Those are the top 10 offenses. On the other side, you got the top 10 defenses. Ohio State, Georgia, Oregon is 3rd, Bama's 4th, Clemson's 5th, Notre Dame is 6th, Michigan is 7th, Texas is 8th, Penn State is 9th, and then Utah is 10th. Now, let me tell you the main thing that I think EA Sports gets wrong about this, because ultimately, if we try to predict what the top 10 offenses this year are going to be or the top 10 defenses this year are going to be, if we try to predict that, then we'd get about half of them right, and we might get them in the right order, we might not. That's a pretty difficult thing to predict. But the one thing when you look at this, I think you can say right away, based on the recent history of college football, that EA Sports gets wrong is they've simply got too many teams in both categories. You've got Georgia showing up as a number 1 on one side and a number 2 on the other. You've got Ohio State in both top 10s. You've got Oregon in both top 10s. You've got Alabama in both top 10s. You've got Texas as both a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. You've got Clemson, believe it or not, as both a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. You have essentially, what, did I just mention 5? You've got like 5 teams thought to be in both the top 10 offense and the top 10 in defense. Now, if it's a video game, you can make it up and have it be whatever you want. In a video game world, I guess anything is possible. But the recent history of college football suggests that to truly be a top 10 level offense and to truly be a top 10 level defense, there won't be 5 teams in that category. There'll probably only be 1. There might be 2. But the ability to be a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense, that's essentially the most predictive thing, I believe, over the course of the last couple of years in terms of who actually wins the national championship. Georgia was that in 2021 and 2022. They hoisted the trophy. Georgia, in my mind, was, at least based on the stats that I just told you about, was just slightly below that in 2023, and they also finished just slightly underneath the standard for winning the national championship this past season. So what does EA Sports really get wrong about its video game ratings? There won't be 5 teams in this country for this upcoming year that have both a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. It's just simply too hard to do. There will probably only be 1. That will be the team that's likely to win the national championship. So I apologize. See, my math was wrong. There are 6 teams in both the top 10 on the offensive side and the top 10 on the defensive side. But when it's all said and done, we would be of the belief that there's likely to only be probably 1. Last year was kind of Notre Dame. A couple of years before that, kind of Georgia. That's what this is. So this is about obviously more than just what EA Sports gets right and gets wrong about its video game ratings. This is about understanding how this upcoming season on the field is going to play out this fall. And to Kirby Smart, for his credit, this is one of those things that he has talked about so much. The word that he uses is complementary, how the offense helps the defense, how the defense sets up the offense, the fact that both sides sort of work together here, that you don't have an offense running 100 miles an hour, tiring out the defense, which sets the offense up in a position where they've got to score 50 to try to win. You've also got a situation where it's not the offense that's kind of plodding along the way that, like, say, an Iowa might be, forcing the defense into a situation where they know if they give up anything, the game's likely over. At Georgia, you've got both sides of the ball working well together. And if you want to go back a couple of years ago, it was after the Tennessee game, the great game in which Georgia, with success on offense and success on defense, really manhandled, got the best of kind of a one-dimensional Tennessee team that was scoring plenty of points but couldn't stop anybody. In a very short, succinct way, Kirby Smart, during that post-game press conference, gave you his belief in the value of both sides of the ball working well together. This is what Kirby Smart said at the time.
I don't think we have to validate complementary football. We've been playing complementary football around here for a long time. I just think that's the way you should play football.
Kirby Smart says he thinks that's the way you should play football, and complementary football is sort of the defining characteristic for who wins the national championship. There won't be 6 teams in America that do that this year at a top 10 rate. There may only be 1. The one team that does that, in very likelihood, could be the team that wins the national championship. In the past, that's been Georgia. And in 2024, it could be Georgia again. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We are happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us, live on video across all platforms. Radio, Athens Sports Radio, 960 The Ref. Podcasts, wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, everything else. In fact, if you've never subscribed to us on podcasts before, whether it's Apple, whether it's Spotify, what a great way to connect with our program and, kind of get the on-demand version. It's very easy to listen to. You can kind of go back and it'll be right where you left off and jump right back into the show again. All of that is really fun. So if you like our content, but you've never subscribed to one of the podcast platforms, this is a great time to do that. Simply find your Apple player if you've got the iPhone, or Spotify on any device, and you can get in there and get all of that going. We'd love to have you join us there on the podcast each and every day. Big thanks to our friends at Kroger, by the way, who make today's program possible. A lot of summer fun going on right now. You got pool party. In fact, our neighbor, we got a little bit of a pool party coming up this weekend. Kind of excited about that. Perhaps you're playing golf or you're going fishing. You may head out to the beach. Well, for all the summer fun you've got going on, Kroger gets you stocked up on all that. Stuff to go inside the cooler, stuff to go on the grill, the plates and napkins you need for all the cookout stuff, or just a way to try, the watermelon and things like that, try to stay cool, as cool as you can this time of year. Obviously, Kroger's going to help you out with all of that. So anything you need, convenient delivery, you can go by in-store pickup, all of that right there at your local Kroger. So find out more online at Kroger.com. Great to have them as a part of DawgNation Daily here today. So quick programming note, we will obviously in a moment talk to Jeff Sentell. By the way, if you were concerned from yesterday, we missed out on our buddy Terrence Edwards. Terrence reached out to me after the show, apologetic. He had an issue come up with his football team. Their practice ran a little longer than he anticipated, kind of lost track of time. So Terrence said he was looking forward to seeing all of you back here again next week. He apologized for that from yesterday, and obviously we'll look forward to that discussion with him. Also, Jeff Sentell coming up in a moment, but there's also a major recruiting event this weekend. Jeff attending there at IMG Academy, which forced us to record with Jeff yesterday. So this is a live show, at least recorded live for those of you who are watching after the fact. But the Jeff Sentell portion of this was recorded on Thursday afternoon. It was actually just prior to Landon Roldan announcing his UGA commitment. But have no fear, before I bring on Jeff to talk about some other recruiting topics, we'll do a little bit of Landon Roldan talk with you right now. In fact, we'll do that as a part of Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Let's show you on the screen Roldan putting his pledge out there to go to UGA, as Jeff Sentell called him a speedy wide receiver, and that's kind of the same kind of graphic that James Coley put up, the Georgia wide receivers coach, on his social media of the very fast race car-like Roldan. Roldan saying that he's 100% committed. It has a beautiful graphic there with Sanford State in the background. Hayes Fawcett, the talented young man from On3, putting that together. And Roldan gets a chance to commit to Georgia, we're led to believe, after some workouts with UGA, where they were, as you would imagine they would be, kind of transfixed by the incredible speed that he put on the table. And this was truly a young man who earned that scholarship on the basis of how he worked out and on the basis of what he's doing, during his high school career there as well. And it kind of leads us to, I think, a couple of pretty interesting talking points as it relates to Georgia football. First of all, we told you this yesterday, that Georgia might not be done at wide receiver for this week after kind of missing out, at least for now, on CJ Wiley, getting Tyler J. Williams. We knew that Georgia had its eyes on Roldan, and Roldan was interested in UGA, and we have said, much like yesterday's show, that the wide receiver position is an incredibly important storyline for Georgia in this 2025 class. They need a lot. They have, obviously reason to believe they're going to have a lot of openings in the receiver position for the 2025 season, trying to fill those through the high school ranks. So not a surprise here that we're talking about another high school receiver here this week, because that has definitely been a position that's been in the spotlight. But beyond that, the other thing that I find to be really compelling about Roldan is that it allows us to have a conversation about one of the things that makes Georgia, Georgia. And, this is not the kind of thing that I think that should be easily overlooked. I think this is a very important thing to kind of dive into, as it relates to the kind of secret sauce that has made UGA so successful. At first blush, obviously, the hallmark of this program has been its recruiting, and the fact that Kirby Smart, through tireless effort and a group of assistants that have the ability to match Kirby's energy, they go out and get top flight, former 4- and 5-star prospects, essentially populating the roster with those types of players. We saw yesterday that Georgia's number 3 in the so-called blue chip ratio from Bud Elliott, the percentage of former 4 and 5 recruits currently on the roster, signed over the course of the last 4 years. It's like, 80% are right there at it for Georgia. That's how successful they are at bringing in the kind of blue chip elite recruits. So when a guy comes in and commits, eventually signs, that doesn't quite fit that profile, if we're just being honest, sometimes that raises a little bit of an eyebrow of, hey, what's going on here? Georgia typically goes after, the blue chip of blue chips, the 5 stars. When this guy is, I'm going to use air quotes here, only a 3-star, what does that mean for UGA? Especially sometimes when it feels like there's a little more of this at the receiver position than there are at other positions. Is this Georgia settling? Is this Georgia, having to do with less than the sort of excellent level that it sometimes pursues at other positions? And I'm going to re-rack a point that I've kind of made before. When it comes to Georgia and wide receivers, there's a lot you can perhaps say. Certainly the overall numbers would suggest that Georgia has historically recruited that position differently than it's recruited other positions. Far more elite recruits in almost any other position group than has been at the wide receiver position, at least based on the recruiting rankings. That's sort of true. And for whatever reason, fair or not, perhaps unfair, but nonetheless persistent, there's a little bit of negative recruiting we would sometimes imagine that exists out there when it comes to what other programs are saying about Georgia in the wide receiver position. We may believe that's unfair, and yet we would all probably acknowledge that to a certain extent it seems to be happening. That's just kind of the way that goes. But a point you perhaps have heard me say before, you can say what you want about Georgia and the receiver position, but the one thing I believe that you have to acknowledge about UGA is there is no program in America that scouts wide receivers better than Georgia does. They found Landon McConkey, and obviously McConkey goes on to be, the highest paid second-round pick of all time, essentially getting first-round money for being the 34th overall pick in last year's draft. As I've mentioned before, it's not just McConkey, though. Someone like Adonai Mitchell, A.D. Mitchell, now everybody recognizes him as a top-flight receiver. Texas obviously wanted to spend big to bring him in on an NIL deal, we're led to believe. But when Georgia brought in Mitchell, well before he became a hero of a 2021 national championship game and a 2022 college football playoff game, when Georgia brought in Mitchell, essentially no one knew who he was, and yet Georgia identified him, brought him in, and cultivated him into a playmaker that was a major contributor on 2 national championship teams. That's the level of scouting that Georgia does at the receiver position. And then beyond that, just the idea of the sort of scouting part of this overall. I still don't think these Georgia coaches, Kirby Smart, who's been there the entire time, other coaches who've been with him near the entire time, I still don't think these coaches get credit for the role that I believe that scouting has sometimes played in Georgia's success. If it's the 5-star who has the perfect look, well, of course, every coach knows to go after him, and you can try to shoot your shot and do your best at bringing somebody like that in, but that's not a very secret sauce. That's not a very mysterious strategy. That's the same thing everyone's trying to do. But when it comes to identifying other players that the rest of the country is just not quite as aware of, this is one of those things that Georgia has proven to be successful at time and time again. And it's been a huge part of the national championship story for Georgia. In fact, after the second of those 2 national championships in L.A. back in 2022, Kirby Smart, at the end of the 2022 season, Kirby Smart was good enough to sort of speak a little bit into exactly what it is that Georgia's looking for when it kind of goes off the board a little bit and brings in a name that's connected to a recruiting profile that's a little bit different than what you would typically expect for UGA. This is good stuff from L.A., Kirby Smart, in January of 2023.
The ability part is important. It's not to be diminished, but sign the right mental makeup and get people that can develop. And how do you measure that, right? Like you can't measure that just on a phone conversation. This guy was sending in videos out in his backyard. He's got a military background. And when you got a military background, you probably got some toughness and some makeup about you that makes you the right way. And we've been fortunate to make some good decisions on kids that maybe other programs didn't value their intangibles enough.
I think that's beautiful from Kirby Smart. And this guy that he references there is Javon Bullard, who's another one of those success stories, other side of the ball, but someone that a lot of the country didn't know anything about, but Georgia was on him. Now, the pandemic made some of that a little bit weird, but nonetheless, Georgia's ability to kind of see through certain things and basically leave no stone unturned is, in many ways, undefeated. And Landon Roldan now, a receiver with a little bit of a different recruiting profile, becomes the latest example of that. There is no guarantee that he'll be as successful as Landon McConkey or A.D. Mitchell or anybody else who's come through this program. Nothing is obviously guaranteed, but the most important designation of all for Roldan may be the fact that Georgia wants him, because if Georgia wants you, typically speaking, that means you've got a lot of potential. And somehow, some way, this program seems to be very good at unearthing that potential and putting it on full display during the games for the rest of the country to see. Maybe, who knows, Landon Roldan will be the latest example of all of that. And that is around the doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Before we're done on the program here today, there was some good news involving UGA this week that I think you need to be aware of, because I think it says something kind of nice about this athletic department right now. We'll get to that. We'll also hear from a former Georgia staffer who has, I think, speaking out in a very emotional way right now. These words probably also important to pay attention to there, too. But before any of that, it's a Friday. That means UGA recruiting talk. We did record this yesterday afternoon, but it's nonetheless interesting. By the way, perhaps even more interesting because as we were talking to Jeff yesterday, he was watching one of the latest UGA commits, Isaiah Gibson, practice. So cool stuff with Jeff right now here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, really fun conversation with Jeff Sentell because there has been so much going on with UGA recruiting as of late. Jeff, nice enough to help us out with some of that as he's also busy traveling around to speak to some of these recruits. Jeff, I understand, if I have this correctly, now this is obviously being pre-recorded today to air on Friday because of some other recruiting-related travels you have going on assignment, as we say in the business. I understand now you are at practice with the recent Georgia commit, Isaiah Gibson. Do I have that correct here right now?
100% accurate, Brandon. We're actually on sacred ground right now. That would be Macon County High School, Montezuma, Georgia, home of Roquan. Everybody listening, watching, doesn't even know the last name there. I'm watching Warner Robins. They're in some off-season OTAs with Macon County, East Lawrence, and Brooks County. And, man, Brandon, we got a whole lot of stuff to talk about here about Isaiah Gibson, sir.
Yeah, so obviously, since we're on the Gibson story, let's just start there because that's not the most recent thing to have happened, but it's obviously the most immediate given the fact of where you're standing here right now. So big recruiting win for Georgia, plays out in a very interesting and public way. So give me your thoughts on how it all kind of goes down with Gibson and what stands as just a massive win for this class here right now.
Brandon, I'm going to start off with a subject that will dovetail into every other subject. The CJ Wiley subject, Travis Smith Jr., offensive weapons, yada, yada, yada. Brandon, I just saw Isaiah Gibson live, man. And, I've seen a lot of dudes that have came through to play the position. Aziz Ojolari, Nolan Smith, Adam Anderson. I'm going to tell you, man, this is not, how recruits say there's a visit high. This is not an evaluation high. But Brandon, if Georgia finds a way to assemble Isaiah Gibson with Joseph Jonah, John Ye already there, and then you tie in Justice Terry, you tie in Elijah Griffin in the class, Brandon, it's not going to matter who's going to be on offense because no one is going to block those three young men consistently in the Southeastern Conference. I mean, I'm feeling like this is something that I'll see rear its head 3 or 4 seasons down the road, man, in the college football playoffs. I'm watching Isaiah Gibson. He, like all the listed things say he's 6'3", 6'3" and some change. But he's every bit of 6'4". He looks 6'5" in pads. The length is there. The energy is there. I just watched this series, Brandon, where the other team was calling him an animal. And he had 4 reps with the first D. I think he had 3 havoc plays in those 4 plays. And the head coach at Warner Robins, all right, guys, let's get them off. Let's get the 2s in. And I'm telling you, Brandon, the other sideline, the other team looked at him and thank you, coach. That's a good idea. Good idea. Let's get some other work in. Let's get those 2s in. And that's how demonstrative and impressive he is. Brandon, he's over here headlining, showcasing this thing. And you know what Isaiah Gibson told me? He's I want to be at Grayson right now. Not because of some transfer issue or anything like that, but because Grayson is holding an OTA in Atlanta at this very moment with Langston Hughes there, with Grayson there. That's Dontrell Glover. That's Tyler Atkinson. He just wants that smoke, Brandon. This is one of the most animated future Bulldogs I've ever seen.
Love to hear that. Working backwards from where we're sitting here right now, Georgia also earlier this week added a commitment from Tyler J. Williams, wide receiver, not to be confused with the previous Tyler Williams that Georgia's also added in a previous recruiting class. The point that I made on Thursday's episode of our program, DawgNation Daily, was that, and you had this in your story at DawgNation.com, the thing that I like the most about Tyler J. Williams is the productivity he's shown in games. The fact that a year ago, more than half of his catches, as you reported, went for touchdowns. To me, that's the kind of skill set that can translate. He's obviously not as well known within the recruiting rankings world as other receivers we have talked about, and in some cases we'll continue to talk about, but certainly a productive player whose star perhaps could be on the rise. Tell us what Georgia is getting when it comes to Tyler J. Williams.
Well, you're right. You're right, man. The football matters, and the rankings. He's a low 5-star. I believe he's around the numbers 57 receiver in the country, Brandon. But you see this clip right here, taking a hitch, taking a little something, and then making a big something out of it. Very explosive. And not only, Brandon, did he have 22 yards per catch on just 26 catches and convert those into 15 paydirt touchdowns, Brandon. He also had 5 touchdowns in the return game. So you're talking about an electric player, as we often try to do, Brandon. We can't talk about Tyler J. Williams. Maybe we can start calling him Big Play Tyler J.
Yeah.
He knows that there's been a previous Tyler Williams, and he says, please, pretty please, guys, can you refer to me as Tyler J. because I'm not that guy. He said, I hope to be something different. And Brandon, the why for this young man is as good as it gets. I ask him every time I talk to a recruit, I know you can play. I know Georgia's recruiting you. I know you are very likely to choose Georgia in this situation, but tell me what you play for, Brandon. He had a touching story. He has an older brother, Trey Williams, who has epilepsy and autism, and as he described it, and he just thinks that older brother could have been roles reversed. That could have been him out there watching his older brother play football. He gets inspiration. He gets reservoirs of motivation for that because it really means a lot. That's a special relationship. He said he hopes to have Trey Williams at every Georgia game so he can look up in the stands and see him smile. And Brandon, if that doesn't touch your heart on a Friday morning with DawgNation Daily, you need some more coffee.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Now, speaking of receivers, you were also on hand earlier this week for, I think, probably the most interesting story of the week. CJ Wiley, I would say surprisingly, choosing Florida State over Georgia. Now, listen, Jeff, we've done a million of these, and I want to show great respect to the players no matter where they, choose to go. If there's also, I think, a need to have the honest conversation here, which was it was a very subdued reaction in the room when Wiley chose Florida State. Perhaps some confusion. There might be a swerve coming, and it might be a Quay Walker hat toss or something like that, which obviously never came in this moment. And, not only was the reaction in the room a little bit muted, I would say that in the case of Wiley himself, the idea that he chose a school other than Georgia because of some massive NIL deal and some shrewd move by Mike Norvell, certainly the body language from Wiley didn't exactly suggest that was the case. And clearly we know that Georgia never gives up in these recruitments anyway. I think that some Georgia fans are also going to take the mood in the room when Wiley announced what he announced as also an extra clue that perhaps this one is far from done as it relates to CJ. What can you tell us about this having been there?
I think, Brandon, first of all, you noted the parent reactions there as well. I mean, Brandon, I've been to maybe, 100 of these by now, 150 of these by now for DawgNation. And this is one of those rare moments where I went there knowing that I kind of thought he was going to choose Georgia. Or if he didn't choose Georgia, it was going to be a big story regardless. And, I mean, Brandon, on Hedges, I don't know where most of the guys are getting this, but on Hedges, I guess dating back to his spring game, I got the feeling that LSU wasn't really the factor. It was either FSU or Georgia. And we can check the receipts. We've been saying that on Hedges for a couple months now. But the thing here is, I don't know about this one, Brandon. I don't know if, the quick parallel is, first of all, it was gracious of CJ Wiley to talk to the media afterward when mostly all Georgia media was there. And he said very honestly, his recruiting's still open. He's committed now. And he's still going to entertain the thought he'll probably go up to Athens and see a visit. Now, I know the half-full DawgNation Daily viewer today is going to think, oh, Florida State, in-state player, Georgia's just going to work on this guy. They're going to consistently never let up with recruiting. And it might be another parallel with KJ Bolden. I kind of want to hit the brakes a little bit on that one, Brandon. The one thing we don't know in this situation is whether or not Georgia will consistently pursue CJ Wiley to the effect or even close to the effect that they did with KJ Bolden. If we knew that, I would say, yeah, then Georgia's probably got a strong shot to do this, man. But now there's Travis Smith. There's the recent Tyler J. Williams. They've already got Travis Blackshear. Brendan, I also understand in this day and age, I must be prudent and share this, that if we're talking NIL and the NIL numbers start going up for big-time receivers, Georgia has been very productive and very efficient in finding SEC starters, big-time players coming out of the transfer portal, rather than inducing or awarding high school kids with that sort of NIL collective offer right now at the receiver position. Love CJ Wiley as a player. I think it maybe turns more of the focus to a guy like Travis Smith Jr. Can Georgia continually to recruit him? Is that now a guy that they focus on instead of continuing to bang the drum for CJ Wiley? Brendan, there's so much news. There's so much information coming down the pipe, not only this week. Brendan, it's hard to believe we've already had 6 commitments in the month. That's a lot, even when I think the Georgia recruiting class is only going to get up to about maybe 30, 31 guys at the most this year. So 6 commitments is in a lot. There's a big miss with CJ Wiley. We'll note that one. We'll mark that one down. But, next week's interesting, Brandon. There's the thoughts of this 6'10" offensive tackle, Ja Jackson, with incredible feet. That's been a basketball player at Overtime Elite. I've been told his decision is coming on July the 6th, and it is slated to be held in Atlanta. That's about as much as I want to share there. That's the information I'm getting. So we're in a world, Brandon. I get it. We're going to go back to the gospel here when you and I talk about recruiting on your program. Everybody gets excited about the skill divas. Everybody gets excited about running backs and quarterbacks. But the trench men, the monsters on the line of scrimmage is where it's getting done. And again, Brandon, I'm sitting here watching right now, trying to contain myself, watching some big-time high school football action. I literally see Isaiah Gibson doing anything that he wants to.
Yeah.
And if you put a guy like that with this ability and you pair him with other like-minded, equally talented guys, man, I think Stacey Searles is going to have problems with his guys blocking a defensive front potentially down the road that Georgia could put together.
All right, so I totally agree. Line of scrimmage seems to be going really well for Georgia right now. And yet, to go back to Wiley for a moment, I think it's interesting you bring up the name Travis Smith because, I think just to be honest, even with Wiley committed to Florida State, I think the conventional wisdom is that Georgia still has a better chance of landing Wiley than it does Travis Smith because of some recent chatter about Smith elsewhere other than Georgia. Are you saying that you disagree with the conventional wisdom on this? Because a lot of people think even with Wiley currently pledged to Florida State, still more likely to get him than Travis Smith right now.
Yeah, I think the next couple of weeks, because Travis is going to decide on July the 13th. I do know that Travis feels that Georgia hasn't really let off in its recruiting. They're still on him very hard. So I think that's going to be very interesting, Brandon. I'm going to be frank. There's no way that I can sit here and say the Georgia 2025 class is as good as it should have been or will be in December without one of those in-state wide receivers in the class. Now, Wiley is the guy that has the high upside because he's a little bit bigger, a little bit faster. But then Travis maybe has more reliable hands, maybe better in certain areas than CJ Wiley. I think one of the two would be fantastic for Georgia. And really, Brandon, like I said on our program Before the Hedges last night, it just shows you how wide receiver recruiting is always going to be daunting, Brandon. You can simply sum up Carson Beck passing offense. You can see the yards. You can look at Ladd McConkey. You can point back to George Pickens. You can see Georgia likely to turn over 5 or 6 wide receivers with this team after the 2024 season. You can see job potential. You can see a perfect storm of 2 very impressive, nationally recognized receivers in the state of Georgia. And it's almost like a perfect storm, Brandon. So if they don't get one of those 2 guys eventually, I think it's going to be Peach State talent left on the table at receiver. But again, the DNA of this program, Brandon, maybe I'm just in the moment right here, but I'm shaking my head at a lot of this stuff, man. The plays that these guys could potentially make together. And I know it's kind of putting the commitments and the flips and all that stuff before the horse here or whatever, man. But just this thought of putting those 3 guys on the same defensive line at Georgia with 3 seasons. What is the term everybody wants to do? Like where everybody wants to go, man. Brandon, that would simply be glorious.
Yeah, let me finish with this. You mentioned line of scrimmage. Obviously, in the midst of all this, Georgia also added Dontrell Glover this week, a player that I know you've got a chance to talk to recently. And what I've said is that, even with all the other success that Georgia's having, the consistent restocking of this offensive line room with, players that can be, high-level performers at the college level, that may be as impressive as anything that Georgia's doing right now. I believe that Stacey Searles deserves a lot of the credit for that. So give me a little quick thumbnail here on what Glover brings to the table for Georgia.
Yeah, they're keywords, Brandon, and I'm going to quote his coach, Coach Boone Williams at Langston Hughes. Mean, nasty, violent, 515 squat, 475-pound bench. He will be a 4-year starter at Langston Hughes, one of the baddest programs in the state of Georgia. They win. They play a physical brand of football. He really wants to punish the defensive lineman in front of him. You're a lot of guard with him now, Brandon. As we had on Before the Hedges last night, center, the ideal center target still feels like Cortez Smith. Cortez Smith told me he had a great official visit to Georgia. No questions. Family loved it. Felt like a priority. He really wants to see the school that not wins and develops, but somebody who takes care of the players for their life after football. And I asked him point blank, I said, how do you feel Georgia takes care of players in that regard, aside from the winning, aside from the development? He's like, man, they're great at it. They fit that box as well. So he's making his decision on July the 20th as well. And again, that's another position of strength when you can add a player like Dontrell Glover, once committed to Alabama, and then a starter for one of the best programs in the state since his freshman year.
All right, very, very quick here. I'll let you get back to Isaiah Gibson, but about Gibson, we talked about this earlier this week. On three's got him at 260-plus pounds. 24/7 Sports got him weighing in at like 245 pounds. Chidera Uzodiribe was the lead recruiter here, but at that size that he's currently listed, that sort of feels like a Mikael Williams who came in as a defensive end. What do you think the position for Gibson's going to be at Georgia? Is he more likely to be a stand-up outside linebacker? Does he put his hand on the ground and play a position like what we saw Trayvon Walker become a #1 overall pick by playing?
That's a good question, Brandon. I think he'll start out with a Mikael Williams trajectory, which means you starting out on that side. Remember, though, Mikael went to that position because Georgia didn't really have a 5-tech in the program that could play at the level that they want, kind of that Trayvon Walker level. I'm going to tell you this, Brandon. He may have the largest set of pads on I've ever seen, but I'm looking up to Isaiah Gibson. And if he's 6'3" and some change, they're being very poor-mouthing about his height, man. He looks like a 6'4" kid. The thing about Isaiah, man, I think he's like 255, 260 right now. They've been practicing for a few hours in this middle Georgia heat. They're about to go to a water park. But I feel like 255, 260 might be a misnomer here when we automatically say, oh, he's going to move to the defensive line. He's going to have his hand in the ground. Okay. Brandon, this young man is so long. He has offensive tackle type length. It's over 7 feet. Imagine sticking to Dikembe Mutombo or Shaquille O'Neal in tip to tip right there. And you've got the type of player. Relentless. His coaches tell me the reason he's so good is he practices every bit as hard as we ask him to play. And that's what makes him special on Friday night. That's what's going to make him special on Saturday night. And there's so many people here at Warner Robins that are telling me today, man, we all knew this was coming. It was an eventuality. Basically, before he chose USC and right after he chose USC, they just felt it was a matter of time before he became a Dawg.
Very good stuff, Jeff Sentell. I certainly appreciate that. We'll let you get back and enjoy that, and can't wait to read plenty more from your travels here over the course of the next few days. Thanks so much for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
Hey, take it easy, Brandon. Thanks, man.
Thanks a lot.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really good stuff from Jeff Sentell there. And today, Jeff at IMG Academy, obviously following the Future 50 event and anything else going on with UGA recruiting, DawgNation.com. Busy, of course, with all of that. Many of you have met Jeff. You love asking him your recruiting questions. Jeff, always so good about answering those. And that's the kind of conversation we have on board the DawgNation cruise each and every year there, as well as we get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Gosh, I have just loved the rollout this week for our 4th annual DawgNation cruise 2025, April of 2025, on board the brand new Utopia of the Seas. And the response to this has already truly been amazing. And I know it sort of sounds like I'm like typical ringmaster, hype man when I say that, but in all truth, that's the case. Because we had to work really hard because of the popularity of Utopia of the Seas. Obviously, the biggest, the newest, probably the best cruise ship we've ever been on for one of these DawgNation cruises. You've already got incredible demand for the ship as it is. So we had to work to kind of secure our space, the size that we need for obviously what the DawgNation Cruise has become. And so we were able to do that special rate on some of the top staterooms on board Utopia of the Seas. And we said, hey, move quick because they're going fast. And I'll tell you, our buddy Jessica Slater can tell you all about this. She's answering the phone left and right because they are flying off the shelf. So your chance to get involved here, go ahead and act right now. Not too soon to start thinking about travel next April on board Utopia of the Sea. So give Jessica a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Or you can email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Also, if you want information about the DawgNation Cruise in particular, there's a link right there at DawgNation.com. If you're reading the site, looking at the stuff, there'll be a cruise link. Just click that link and get in there and find out more about the DawgNation Cruise right there. And, of course, I am looking forward to I was actually talking to Kaylee Manziel, who's here with us today a couple of minutes ago. I'll be on Utopia of the Seas actually pretty soon. And it's one of those deals where it kind of sneaks up on you a little bit. We got that here coming up in just a little bit. For now, though, let's go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. So I saw this story, and honest question, a couple of honest questions, which will kind of lead to something else here in a moment. So Nick Saban, we're getting a little bit of natural sound bleeding in there. Nick Saban is going to kind of retain a position at Alabama, no longer head coach, but still kind of in some sort of emeritus ex aficionado capacity at Alabama. We found out this week that he's going to be paid $500,000 for that role. Now, here's a couple of questions, and this is literally me just asking questions. Have we seen this before? And if we have, how frequently is it that a guy like Saban, a towering figure in the sport overall, certainly a towering figure at Alabama, remains an Alabama employee after his coaching tenure came to an end? Now, obviously, Vince Dooley at Georgia was an example of that, but he was the athletic director. Nick Saban's not going to be that. He's just, essentially a ceremonial figure. Like, what is the purpose of keeping him around? And the question I think you have to ask is, what are they paying him $500,000 a year for? $500,000 is obviously a small sum to someone as rich as Saban, but it's not an insignificant sum of money, no matter how much money you possibly have. There are two reasons why I find this to be interesting. I think that Kalen DeBoer already faces a huge challenge at Alabama. I think that challenge is made even more difficult if the shadow of Saban continues to loom around the program. I just think that's true. It's big shoes to fill as it is. It's especially big shoes to fill if the other guy is sort of standing there as a very easy sort of side-by-side comparison for Alabama fans to participate in. But beyond that, here's where I think it matters to Georgia fans and people who are not Alabama fans. Nick Saban is also being paid to be an analyst on ESPN's College Game Day here this year. Now, I think we've long given up the pretense that ESPN is associated with anything closely resembling journalism. This is obviously an entertainment product. Entertainment is obviously right there in their name. But this still, to me, and I know this kind of comes across as sort of tinfoil hat conspiracy, I guess, but this still feels like we've kind of crossed another Rubicon here. If Nick Saban, while an analyst for ESPN, is getting paid $500,000 per year by Alabama, do we have any reason to believe that Saban will ever say anything critical of Alabama? Furthermore, if he's not willing to say anything critical about Alabama, is there a chance that he might say things that perhaps benefit Alabama based on what he says about other programs? Now, he probably would do that anyway. Obviously, long-standing ties to Alabama. But still, if we care about how things look, Saban getting paid $500,000 a year by Alabama to go talk about Alabama and other programs on College Game Day, surely I'm not the only one who kind of wonders, is there any conflict of interest here? I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one that feels that way, but it seems like a little bit of a weird thing and perhaps a little bit uncomfortable for Kalen DeBoer and maybe plenty annoying for the rest of us here. I saw where Scott Cochran, fresh off an AJC story from a couple of weeks ago, was also on the Paul Feinbaum show yesterday talking about his battle with addiction. And, no huge point for me on this. I just wanted to point out, if you want to go check out the Feinbaum show, you can hear this. I do believe this is a very important thing because I do think that sometimes in football and sometimes in sports, just kind of below the surface, there's a lot about like how athletes, coaches, people like that kind of relate to substances that doesn't always get the attention that it should possibly get. And so when someone's willing to speak out and say, hey, I went too far. I had some issues. I had some problems, and I had to own that. I mean, I'm ready to tell my story about that. I just think it can be a really valuable thing in terms of someone else hearing Scott Cochran's story and saying, you know what, if I'm being honest, that sort of sounds like me, which is kind of this genesis for a lot of change and important change in people's lives can end up being. And I know that Coach Cochran's been through so much, and I know a lot of people who have loved him and just, you talk about his time in Alabama. I mean, his Alabama players loved him, and he's obviously a very important figure in many of their lives. And obviously, while he has been battling what he's been battling, there's been this sort of continual series of prayers going out for him. And now his story being used to perhaps, help other people now too. I think this can be a really important thing. And obviously we wish Coach Cochran well as he continues to go through all of that. Now, on a completely different note, kind of back to football on the field, I saw where Steve Sarkisian, the Texas coach, was talking about, the challenge of the Texas schedule. And he was sort of talking about something along the lines of, hey, we got to play to our standard. We got to know we're going to get everybody's best shot every single week, essentially saying, hey, we're Texas and we're the biggest thing in town. Now, the truth is, this is where I'm being probably a little bit unfair, if I'm being honest, because I don't know that Sarkisian said anything all that salacious, but it still sort of seemed to be a little presumptuous, a little bit, assuming that in any game they play, they're the big dog and somebody else is trying to take Texas down a peg, which is one of the reasons why the Georgia-Texas game in October is such a big deal. Now, Georgia needs to handle its business against Clemson and on the road against Kentucky and, of course, Alabama. Georgia's got to handle some business to make the game as big as it could be. Texas, for what it's worth, needs to do some of the same kind of stuff. But what's so fascinating about Georgia versus Texas is I do believe that Sarkisian's words, even though they're not really all that, problematic or anything like that, I do think it's reflective, though, of how Texas fans feel. That Texas fans feel that they are bigger than the SEC. On the basis of what? There's really no evidence to suggest that's even close to true, but Texas fans have never needed evidence to think, whatever they want about their program. They just think they're the big dog because supposedly everything is bigger than Texas, even if your on-field record is actually fairly meager. And, of course, meager would be almost complimentary based on what Texas has actually done for most of the 21st century, save 1 year with Vince Young and this previous year when they made the college football playoff. But the ego is just larger than life. Georgia has the real tangible accomplishments. Georgia has the resume. They're the ones that have been winning championships. So you've got one program that wants to prove it really is as good as it thinks it is. And you've got another program in Georgia, at least, you could sort of write the storyline that wants to go in and show Texas what the SEC is all about. I mean, I don't know how you don't get excited about that game. I find that to be fascinating, where you've got a real clash of fan bases and kind of perceived notions about each program. So interesting. In the words of Steve Sarkisian there, kind of give a little bit more life to that. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here on DawgNation Daily, want to switch gears here now and get ready to do our long finish poured as we go into the weekend by our friends at the Finnish Long Drink. A lot of pool parties, things like that coming up this weekend. A lot of Finnish Long Drink flowing when that's ongoing. And by the way, how good does that peach-flavored can look right there? You love to see that. So let's do this here for a moment. There was some news earlier this week that I don't know that we've given proper attention to. I kind of wanted to save this for our long finish just to sort of have a little bit more time to talk about it. I would say in the SEC this week, and this is typically a time in which football recruiting kind of dominates, and we've obviously been very interested in that, but perhaps the most compelling story in the SEC thus far this week was the weird coaching carousel thing in baseball where Jim Schlossnagle left Texas A&M to take the Texas job, making Aggies fans furious. Longhorns fans kind of loved the flex and all of that, and we got some kind of unexpected drama in the college baseball world right here in the new look SEC. But in the midst of all of this, with job openings becoming available and big spending perhaps on deck, Georgia very quietly but very assertively was able to re-up its coach, Wes Johnson, announcing that earlier this week that the University of Georgia and head baseball coach Wes Johnson agreeing to an extension through 2030, essentially, for all intents and purposes, taking Johnson out of the coaching carousel that might spin here, not a candidate for Texas A&M, and seemingly not a candidate to go anywhere in the very near future. And I do think this is one of those things that Georgia needs to get a lot of credit for, because the ultimate truth is that in football, there's always money to do what needs to be done. In baseball, you don't necessarily have an unlimited windfall of cash just to sort of reach out and grab anytime you want to do something. You have to be a little bit more judicious about your spending. And if I'm just being completely honest, a few years ago, and this is just maybe my assumption, but perhaps correctly, I'm not quite so sure that Georgia does the right thing here and holds on to Wes Johnson, that if one of these other programs that needed a coach fresh off a big performance from Johnson, maybe if it's a few years ago, we're talking about Johnson taking a different job and going somewhere else because maybe Georgia just wasn't quite willing to do the spending necessary to make the job attractive enough and the salary equal to what a coach might get a chance to be paid elsewhere. But that's not what Georgia's doing here in this case. And they're doing it at what you would assume is sort of a net debit on the overall athletic department budget, because we obviously know that there are some clear budget constraints when it comes to baseball overall, but that's not stopping Georgia from doing the right thing, from trying to do everything it can be to be as competitive as it can be in this sport that a lot of us think is a lot of fun, talking about college baseball. And if you want to go back to when Georgia won the NCAA Regional, advancing to the Super Regional, on its way to getting just one game shot of the College World Series, that commitment to baseball that the program is showing right now, that's something that Wes Johnson said attracted him to the job in the first place. Important to go back and hear Coach Johnson on this now that we know that he's got the contract extension that could keep him in Athens for many years to come. This is what Wes Johnson has said.
I think the reason I want to thank them, the support we get from them. I mean, that was a big draw for me. Like their vision, like they were passionate about what they not only want to do, here for the university, but where they want athletics to go. And when you see that kind of passion and that drive to, get to a level that they want to be to, then yeah, you get excited. And so I think those things, like I say, it takes everybody. It's just not just me or, it takes our coaching staff, it takes our support staff, the grounds, it takes everybody if you're going to be successful. And, boy, it's hard to push the rock uphill both ways, so to speak. So I think it's important that those people are mentioned, just because without them, I don't think we're here.
So great stuff from Wes Johnson there, and a good job by Georgia re-upping him, getting that contract extension. I think a lot of us have really grown to appreciate how fun of a sport college baseball can be. And it's also providing plenty to appreciate that Georgia seems committed to being a part of that competition for many years to come. And that is our long finish, presented by the Finnish Long Drink. As I said before, you got a big weekend coming up. Let the Finnish Long Drink be a big part of that. Out by the lake, playing golf, especially seems like playing golf. Golfers seem to love the Finnish Long Drink here. By the way, a little golf talk last night. Perhaps you were made aware of. Either way, the Finnish Long Drink, great on the golf course, great at the lake, great at the pool, great wherever you are here this summer. So go to thelongdrink.com. Find out about the peach-flavored version of the peach steak for a limited time, long drink cranberry, long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume, long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar, the traditional, still my favorite, the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. I believe our buddy Kaylee Manziel says that's still her favorite too. So there you go, a little bit of agreement there from us on that. Either way, get you some this weekend. Many of you love it. It's a regular part of what you're doing all summer long. But if you haven't tried the Finnish Long Drink before, go to thelongdrink.com, put in your zip code. You can find out where to pick some up. It sort of looks like a beer because it comes in a can, but it's not. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. And this fun new category of beverage, this sort of mixed drink, you don't have to mix yourself, we believe that nothing in this category tastes better than the Finnish Long Drink, dominating from a flavor standpoint and a big part of what we do here around Dog Nation. So check them out online, thelongdrink.com, for a lot more on that. We have batteries in my earpiece that I use to listen to the show. And those batteries died a couple of minutes ago, but I trust you're hearing the fight song the way that you typically do. And it provides a nice little stream into the end of the show for us and a chance to give out our golden shoe for today. A lot of fun submissions here this week. I also want to shout out Brian. I believe it's Weller. Am I pronouncing that correct? Maybe it's Weiler. Brian Weiler, maybe. Or Wheeler. Hopefully, between one of those three pronunciations, I got the right one there for Brian. Let's go with Wheeler. Brian Wheeler says he is all in on the Dogs winning it all and Carson Beck for the Heisman Trophy. He said he was out in Las Vegas here this week, and he shows us the portion of the receipt there from the sports book, the Yahoo Sportsbook powered by William Hill, right there in the Venetian, the beautiful All Suite Hotel. How about that, Brian? Nice spot to be right there at the Venetian. Good stuff there. Also, a little bit of a bet down on both Carson Beck to win the Heisman, Georgia win the national championship. That's a fun ticket to be holding as we roll through the fall, and certainly quite worthy of a golden shoe here for today. So, Brian, we will let you enjoy that, and good luck on getting a chance to cash that ticket. And the best part of that, going out to Vegas again to enjoy that as you do. So, fun stuff there. How about the lousy, stinking Gators? Nobody betting on them right now. It's been 1,329 days since they've beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. That is our Gator Hater Updater. We hope you all have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. I'm just going to take off my headphones. I'm not going to change the batteries here right now. So right when the Johnson clip was playing, my batteries died. I'm usually pretty good at switching them out, but today I forgot to. So we'll take your comments here as part of our R.S. Andrews cool down across all platforms. By the way, next week is the 4th of July. I have been told, sources are telling me, we will not be here for that, but that's the only day we're missing. There are like 4 holidays we don't work at all on. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Memorial Day, 4th of July. For the most part, other than that, we're typically here, and the expectation is that we'll be here, so off Thursday and then back again on Friday. So that's what's going down for that. Let's see what else. Jay Shipe says about Texas, they're going to get everyone's best shot. Welcome them to the SEC. I just hope that they're capable. I think the point I'm trying to make is I hope they're capable of providing their own best shot, because this idea of they're going to be the biggest team in every game they play, not that particular Saturday in October they won't. Not to many of us anyway. Let's see what else. Paul Moon says, not going to lie, I love watching the old Ricky Williams games in the ESPN Classic. Yeah, I mean, first of all, it just takes you back. A lot of those games from that era, favorite players, things like that, just sort of takes you back to an era in which, you maybe just really, really loved college football. I mean, it still do, of course, but, some of that stuff just kind of reminds you of so many fun things from that time, for sure. For sure. Let's see what else is going on. ESPN, Mike Tambadog says you lay down the law. You're paid by us $13 million. You're paid by Bama $500,000. Your choice Saban, you have 24 hours. Yeah, I mean, am I wrong for saying this? I mean, look, when you've got an alma mater, something like that, I mean, the expectation is you're going to have some affinity for them, especially if you live close by. So, people are human beings, and humans have biases. We've never really had a huge issue with somebody having a bias, not necessarily. But it does seem to be a little bit weird to be on a desk as one of the prominent voices for a sport, a very important show even still at ESPN's College Game Day, maybe not as significant as it once was, but still a pretty important show overall, and yet you're getting paid by another school while you're doing that? Seems a little bit weird to me. Perhaps it's less weird than I think it is. Let's see what else. Lance D, on the subject of the horns down thing, I saw that's not going to be in the video game. There is nothing I hate more than horns down discourse. Truly find that detestable. And such a small, petty thing that, like everything about Big 12 Media Days was always about how horns down, this deal here, how that was going to be officiated. Will it be a flag? Will it be a penalty? That's just such a soft topic. I don't know. Let's see what else. G. Grace mentions David Pollock. I mean, like David Pollock was a Georgia guy, lives in the Athens area, close to Kirby Smart in the program, like many players with an alma mater would be, but it didn't work for Georgia. To me, that's just a different type of thing. Let's see what else. Lance D says, let's be fair, BA Texas fans have earned the scorn with their arrogance. I don't deny that. Texas fans, are sort of a different type of breed here. And I sort of have the premonition that we're not going to be fans of theirs. Sort of have that premonition. Foster Moss says, I can't wait until they come to Athens if that horns down thing offends them. Yeah, listen, if you think the worst thing, and I don't take any pleasure in saying this, but if you think the worst thing that can happen to you is have someone do horns down in your general direction, man, life in the SEC is going to be tough. It's going to be tough if that's what you think. Jonathan Aaron says, my math ain't math. And yeah, never put it past me to make a basic error. Never, some sort of basic error, the kind of thing that I very easily can do. Yeah, no question about that. Any sort of basic error, I'm more than capable of making at any point in time. Aaron Dixon says Saban and Pollock solo would be must-see TV. Now, I've also said this, and my prediction proved right for the NFL draft. I said that I thought that Saban would be good on TV, and I think he probably will be. I really do. I think that Saban will probably be good on television. I think he will be an operative working to the benefit of Alabama, but effective in the role. Well reviewed. Texas Dog says, I'm glad there's a Whataburger down the street from my new house in Athens. First of all, Texas, it's good to have you living here in the Peach State now. And it's been one of the interesting rollouts lately that Whataburger, which is kind of typically thought of as a Texas staple, has really expanded its reach into Georgia. There are a lot more Whataburgers around our state now than there once were. Jay Shipe says, aren't there a bunch of In-N-Outs coming to Georgia? If this is like a real thing, and like you're talking about the West Coast fast food chain, I haven't heard that. I mean, as of now, they haven't gone any farther east than Texas, right? There's like one or two in Texas, a couple in like Arizona. I know there's a couple in Las Vegas. I'm a big In-N-Out fan. Now, In-N-Out, like anything else, has been just ravaged by inflation. But the one thing I used to really say about In-N-Out is that because now even like McDonald's is expensive. I mean, the inflation is just so terrible. Even McDonald's is expensive now. But the one thing that I used to always tout about In-N-Out is that people would compare it to like Five Guys or something like that, which I love. Very good. But just to be honest, a meal there is about $20-something. Whereas like In-N-Out had more like traditional fast food type prices. I always felt like for the price, In-N-Out really was very impressive quality for a pretty affordable price. It was to me the sort of burger version of Chick-fil-A, which is a little bit more brand recognition than we typically do on the show. But that's kind of what I always thought In-N-Out was. It was kind of the burger version of Chick-fil-A. But I'm not really quite so sure those prices are quite as good anymore. Jay Shipe says it's Jack in the Box. Yeah, now Jack in the Box, I don't know the first thing about. I think there is a Jack in the Box in South Carolina somewhere. I think I've seen before. I know that's been around for a long time. The only thing I know about Jack in the Box, they're the ones that I think for a while, I've never eaten there. They're the ones that pushed that breakfast all day thing. McDonald's briefly copied that, and then they stopped doing that. I don't know much about Jack in the Box. I know it's a West Coast thing. They have that really scary looking mascot, even scarier than the Jack in the Box mascot is even scarier than the Burger King, I believe. But I don't know much about the quality of the food. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron said, who did better on the draft coverage? Was it Saban or was it Bill Belichick? I think they're pretty similar in some respects. The fact that they both have a little more personality and they kind of let on sometimes, I believe. Belichick's always been good at talking about like old time football and things like that. I believe I probably was maybe more impressed by Saban on the draft, but Belichick has certainly been, he's been kind of good at a lot of things. He does all those like NFL Network, like documentaries and things like that. Let's see what else. Ryan Walker on Saban being on television. Like, I don't have a problem with you being an analyst, but I do think it's weird, to be an analyst and still an employee of one of the schools you're supposed to be analyzing. I think that's a little bit weird. In other words, if Saban truly retired from Alabama, went on TV and said nothing but good stuff about Alabama, we would sort of expect that would probably be true. That's kind of the way that goes. We would expect that to be the case. But there's still a little bit of a difference in doing all that stuff while still being paid by Alabama. I think that's strange. Alan Verbanchik says that Whataburger failed badly in Valdosta. Yeah, I always worry about this, and this is not about this specific chain, but anytime there's like massive expansion of a brand, don't you always worry that it's just going to kind of not go very well? Let's see what else. Scotty Barnes says Texas will have their little feelings hurt when they come to Athens. Yeah, maybe the case, Scotty. That's very funny. Maybe the case. Matt Rukavina, good to see you in here. Talking about, comparing the situation with Texas to Ohio State. Good at beating up the crap teams, but when they face real competition, they fold. Sometimes that seems to be the case for sure. Jerry Popham on the subject of Nick Saban earning $500,000 just to say good things maybe about Alabama. He says the cost of everything is going up. Yeah, indeed. That kind of coverage could have perhaps been a little bit cheaper in sort of a pre-inflationary world. Let's see what we got here. All right, so we get the overall team power rankings coming out from EA Sports. No surprise to see Georgia at number 1. No surprise to see Ohio State at number 2. You got Oregon at number 3. Bama at number 4. Texas at 5. Clemson at 6. So all this is basically just like the averaging of those other ratings we saw a little earlier. Is there anything that semi-surprising about this? Let's see. Colorado's 16. That's the dumbest thing in the world. I mean, listen, but that's exactly what video games should be. I mean, the problem that, like in a video game, you can make it be whatever you want. And people like Colorado. They like Dion. They like Shador. So in a video game world, you could make them the best team if you wanted to. I mean, a video game does not have to be real life. You think Mario could really jump over, is Yoshi a dragon? Or no, Bowser, what is he, a dragon? Is Bowser a dragon? I mean, you think a creature like that lives in a castle? You can make a video game be anything you want it to be. A little yellow thing that goes around and eats dots. In real life, if you play Galaga, a spaceship against like 30 other spaceships, that's not going to go very well. But in a video game, super easy for one spaceship to beat 30 or however many there were. You can make a video game anything you want it to be. So the video game buying public is into Colorado. So therefore, Colorado is 16th best in the country according to this EA Sports Power Ranking. They may win 4 games in the actual season, but in this season, in the video game season, you can make them whatever you want. The problem they have is that real life can't ever match the sort of make-believe that exists in some of the Colorado, the hype contributors' minds. You can't make reality bend to that, but in the video game world, you can. So why not? So there you go. Let's see what else. Zach Adams says, do y'all prefer our chance in the playoffs with a regular season loss or going in undefeated? I'm not necessarily one of these people who believe that a loss helps you in terms of, it refocuses you, things like that. It seems like that chatter sometimes exists in football. But I do believe, given the nature of the Georgia schedule, a loss is certainly possible. And maybe, we just heard from our guy Steve, who was out there in Las Vegas. If you're going to bet on Georgia, sometimes instead of betting the over-under, you can bet on a specific record. Obviously 11-1 to me would be, a record that I think is entirely possible for Georgia here this year. And as I've said many times, I'm not even sure what the loss would most likely be. But more likely than not, against a schedule like this, I believe losing a game is the kind of thing that could certainly happen. Matt Rukavina says he doesn't see us having a big rivalry with Texas. I feel like there'll be a rivalry with Alabama and LSU more likely. Well, certainly they're closer to LSU. I think the point I've made about this past is right now there's very little in the way of history between Georgia and Texas. But if they were to play twice this season and the possibility of playing 3 times, once you start having these multiple matchups within a season, which I do think is a possibility because I don't think that Texas is going to come into the league and fall flat on its face. I don't believe it's going to be Georgia necessarily, but I don't believe it's going to come in here and fall flat on its face. And so, if that happens, you've got a Texas team kind of playing as one of the league's best and playing Georgia on a regular basis more frequently. I believe you could certainly become a rival pretty fast in a situation like that. Let's see what else. SCM Dog, on the subject of, he mentions having an autistic grandson, and obviously Tyler J. Williams told Jeff Sentell that his own autistic brother is one of the motivations that Tyler has to play football. SEM Dog saying that will make him a fan of his for a long time. I'm right there with you. That's a great thing to be able to hear. A great thing to be able to hear, SEM. You're right. Very inspiring for sure. We have very successfully steered clear of the thing that everybody's talking about all day long today. So I just want you to keep this in mind. When we say, when we make a promise to you that we try to stay in our lane, we truly, truly, truly commit to staying in our lane. Because I can promise you, the entirety of the universe is talking about the same thing here today, but we are not. Because when you show up here, we want you to know what you're going to get. You can get the other stuff anywhere else. We'd like to think, on this particular day, we're the one place you can get this. So we try to show up and do what you expect from us. So even when it's funny, and some of this stuff is funny, even when it's funny, we're going to we're going to avoid all of that. All right, let us see what else. Nature Gator says Texas fans better get used to horns down from fans in the SEC. Players shouldn't mock opposing players, though. I hate when the SEC players do the chant when they beat Florida. No issue with fans doing it. Yeah, as you might imagine, Nature, I have a little bit of a different take on the mock versions of the Gator chomp. I'm particularly fond of Gator chomp into throat slash. I am particularly fond of that one. All in kind of one sort of fail swoop, one continuous motion. Jonathan Aaron says, is this true? Bill Belichick's going to be on the Manning cast all year long? That's pretty interesting. I did not see that. That's pretty interesting. Yeah, the Belichick stuff is weird. I mean, for a lot of reasons, which I'm a senior dog 54. That's very funny. I said, Senior Dog put something out there, and then I said what I said, and he came back to say, it's a sports-related comment. And there was a little sports last night. There was. You couldn't help but notice it. Randy Hall says that he has a high-functioning autistic grandson. So, yeah, I mean, that's one of those things that's touched a lot of people. And Tyler J. Williams' story on that, I think, can be equally inspiring. No doubt that's the case. And I know how many of you, obviously, you both love and are inspired by what you see the younger folks in your life, doing and overcoming. No doubt that's the case. All right, final comments. We're ready to go. Alan Verbonchik says that LeBron James will be teaching his son the fine art of floppery. Maybe so. I do wonder if a different team other than the Lakers had drafted LeBron James, would LeBron have gone there? Now, supposedly the rumor was that other teams were being told that Bronny would go to Australia, not come to them if they drafted them. Because even though LeBron's not what he once was, and even though the salary would be huge, he's still probably good box office. And, I mean, listen, I don't watch a ton of NBA anymore, but when LeBron plays hard, it's like he was playing hard around – like LeBron's always in his life been interested in the wrong things. The example of that was the in-season tournament they had. He was playing really hard for that. And it's amazing, even at this kind of advanced age, and way more minutes than you would think. I mean, it's not even the age for LeBron, because truly he's not that old. It's the minutes played, man. He has played a ton of minutes, year after year after year, ton of basketball. But, you go back to the in-season tournament, a completely meaningless thing that LeBron, was seemingly obsessed with, like many other meaningless things he's been obsessed with. When he wanted to play hard, he could still play pretty hard. So, LeBron being back on the open market probably would have been a pretty big deal. But at last, that will not happen. All right. Anything else? Philip Jordan Wells says no Bronny talk. Maybe we should add that to the list of other things that we're not talking about here today. Maybe that's the case. Tennille asking about a haircut. I'm due for a haircut. My hair is a mess. I'm actually getting cut tomorrow. I'm due for a haircut bad. All right. We are going to go. Good stuff. Y'all have a good weekend. Try to go a little longer on the comments today just to kind of make up for the fact that I don't know we did a ton yesterday. So y'all have a great weekend. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that, including getting your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. All right, y'all have a great weekend. Check them out, rsandrews.com. We'll see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.